This week on the Wheelhouse, President Trump's big, beautiful bill, what it means for Medicaid and Connecticut's budget. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. It's the show that connects the politics of the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. Last week, Connecticut lawmakers poured an extra $284 million into Medicaid. It was a rare play call by the General Assembly. Lawmakers chose to exceed a state budget cap for the first time in nearly 2 decades. Now all eyes are on the White House. How might President Trump's tax proposal, which calls for cuts to Medicaid, impact recipients across the country? How might people in Connecticut be affected? Millions of Americans' Medicaid coverage hangs in the balance. This hour, I'm joined by Lisa Hagan, federal policy reporter for Connecticut Public and the Connecticut Mirror. So great to see you this morning. Good morning, Lisa.
Great to be with you, Frankie.
Great to have you here. And also joining us, Joan Alker. Joan is a research professor at the Georgetown McCourt School of Public Policy. She also serves as the executive director of the Center for Children and Families. Joan, it's so great to have you on the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I'm also wondering, folks, are you on Medicaid? Are you worried about what comes next? Give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Lisa, late last week, a sweeping Republican tax bill passed the U.S. House. That big, beautiful bill, as President Trump calls it, proposed drastic changes to Medicaid, food benefits like SNAP, which Lisa Hagan is always all over, income taxes, and border security. Lisa, if passed by the Senate, what would this bill do to Medicaid?
Yeah, it's quite a sweeping bill, as you said. So, I mean, it's going to do a lot for tax reform, extending a lot of those tax cuts that were in the first term of the Trump administration, and to pay for a lot of that tax relief and as well some immigration and energy measures. Republicans are looking at taking some pretty sweeping cuts to things like Medicaid and to SNAP, formerly known as food benefits. And so I'm sure as we'll get into over the next coming minutes is basically they're going to do that by restructuring those programs. And one way of doing that is work requirements. And so it'll be quite a big change coming for programs like Medicaid, SNAP, social, all these safety net programs. But at the same time, as I'll probably mention throughout this time too, these things are still kind of in flux. They just passed the House recently. The Senate is going to take it up starting next week, and these can all look pretty different. But as of right now, we're looking at a pretty big restructuring of these programs.
Joan, what are your impressions of the bill?
Well, first of all, just to note that it is actually officially called the One Big Beautiful Act, which is interesting. And this bill has been rushed through the House. I know I have been following the Medicaid provisions extremely closely, and I'm a night owl. And I've been asleep when they've been doing most of them. We saw the language drop on Mother's Day at 10:30 p.m. The committee that oversees Medicaid began marking up or doing its work on that legislation just 2 days later when folks had barely had a chance to understand it all. And here we find ourselves with the largest cut in Medicaid's history, about $800 billion over the 10-year period of the bill.
You're saying that that's by design, I would imagine. 10:30 on Mother's Day. That's what you're essentially saying.
That's when the bill language dropped. You know, these are really complicated issues. I've been studying Medicaid for decades, and they're hard for me to understand. Sure. And the Congressional Budget Office, which is the sort of nonpartisan scorekeeper, when the committee moved on this bill, there are 26 Medicaid provisions, and they had only had time to figure out the impacts of 16 of them.
Congressional Budget Office, you just mentioned it. How many people are they saying will be impacted by this $800 billion cut? And who are some of the people that might fall into this group?
Yeah. So on the Medicaid side, they're saying about 8 to 9 million people will lose their Medicaid coverage, and that overall the bill will result in an increase in the number of uninsured people, about 7 million people. And a lot of these folks are adults who are getting Medicaid. We'll talk more about that, I'm sure, in a minute. But another population I just wanted to flag, because it hasn't got a lot of attention, is that we have folks in this country who are covered by both Medicare, the primary program for seniors, of course, and Medicaid. And the reason they're in both is because Medicare doesn't cover long-term care, for example. And so Medicaid is covering the majority of seniors in nursing homes. And Medicaid also picks up some of the cost sharing for the lowest income seniors. And the CBO estimates that 1.3 million seniors and people with disabilities will lose their Medicaid. So they won't become uninsured, but they're going to lose critical services for those seniors.
Dual eligibles, something I want to dive in with you a little deeper into the program. The goal of these cuts, according to President Donald Trump, is to save the government money. But if more than 8 million Americans are taken off of Medicaid and the people still need coverage, I would imagine at that point, who pays for it?
That's a great question. And first, I want to note that overall, this bill is hugely adding to the national debt. So trillions of dollars, in fact, to the debt. So it's not actually paid for, these tax cuts, which will disproportionately benefit the wealthy. But to the extent that it is paid for, Medicaid is unfortunately top of the list here. And folks' healthcare needs don't go away. And so what's going to happen is states are going to be left with extremely hard choices. They will either have to raise taxes, they will have to cut services, or they have to cut other areas of their budget, like K through 12 education. I don't think any state is really in a position to make up the kinds of cuts to Medicaid that we're seeing here. And so, yes, if people are uninsured, we know they get less care, but they still wind up in the emergency room, right? And that is a huge part of the problem when people are uninsured. They're not able to access the primary and preventive care that can help keep them out of the emergency room. So it's very short-sighted, but that's where we find ourselves.
Lisa Hagen, Medicaid is a joint state-federal partnership. It's a two-way traffic flow, if you will. So we know Connecticut is trying to make some moves here to shore up Medicaid. They already foot the bill for Medicaid recipients in the state. It's the biggest part of our budget. Does the bill call for any changes to that kind of cost-sharing dynamic that the state and federal government share?
As of right now, it's mostly focused on kind of restructuring it through work requirements. And so I know that a lot of state officials, states, not just Connecticut, were looking at whether kind of that federal matching would change. And so that is not in the bill as of right now. I don't imagine that would necessarily change. And so it is kind of just focused on implementing those work requirements, a number of other things as well, implementing co-pays for certain kinds of Medicaid services, and really, but it does put quite a burden on states though, because it would have to do more frequent checks of eligibility. That would put a financial burden on states having to set up something like that. This is something we've seen in other states when during the first Trump administration, they tried certain states where they had expanded Medicaid had tried to implement work requirements. That was a really difficult, burdensome thing. A lot of that got held up in court. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of if this all gets passed through Congress, what Connecticut might have to do. And I will add as well, this is something that will be a few years down the road. So they have some time to implement this and figure out how to implement such a system.
Work requirements. It's interesting because Medicaid encompasses a lot of people that are low income. So it's not just adults, but nonetheless, they're trying to target some folks that are adults and receiving benefits, and then they're going to slap work requirements on them. But some of those people, or many of them, already do work.
Yeah, a lot of people who receive Medicaid already do work, and so it'll be interesting to see kind of how they decide to implement this. But yeah, I think it's a misconception that a lot of people in the in the system don't work, and there are exceptions where certain people would not have to work, people who are disabled, pregnant people would not have to work, and there would be carve outs in this, but yeah, I think there's definitely a misconception on it.
Hey, your colleague at the Connecticut Mirror, Keith Phaneuf, great reporting on state finances. He's the one reporting that for the first time since 2007, Connecticut is exceeding its budget cap. That should tell you how serious the situation is and how much of it is driven by concerns over Medicaid.
Yeah, so they're not a budget expert like my colleague Keith, but not most of us can't be. But yeah, they'll be using some of the state surplus to cover some of the state agency overspending, and Medicaid seems to be about coming to more than half, 2/3 of that. And so yeah, as you said, it'll be exceeding the spending cap for the first time since 2007. So yeah, Medicaid is a huge issue for the state. And as we're talking about and looking at what Congress is doing, this is kind of playing in the background, sitting on the back burner. But in a couple of years, if this passes, Connecticut and other states are going to have to reckon with how to deal with other issues with Medicaid.
Joan, is this something that's popular within Republicans? Are they supportive of this big, beautiful bill?
So, excuse me, in terms of the Medicaid cuts, they're really not popular with voters of any party. Medicaid's a very popular program. There are the majority of families in this country have been touched by Medicaid, and they know that they're going to need it there to be there when they might need it, when their parent ages and needs long-term care. And their cousin gets pregnant and doesn't have private insurance. So there is not public support for this, and we've seen this time and time again. Medicaid expansion for adults has been on the ballot in a number of red states, and it's passed in every single state. So what we really have here is an agenda that's driven by a hard right agenda that's driven by these budget cutters who really have it out for Medicaid. And we see that at the state level. And so you're seeing a tension arrive within the Republican Party, which is actually really pretty interesting. President Trump's own pollster told him that nobody wants Medicaid cuts, including MAGA voters. So you are seeing tension within the party, but unfortunately, nonetheless, we have this potentially largest cut in Medicaid history. And just a quick friendly amendment to Lisa's point. She's right that overall the bill doesn't directly cut federal funding. However, it does cut the ways that states raise their share. This is a jointly financed program, and states have to put some of their own money on the table for it. And the bill does restrict the way states can do that. So it's sort of a double squeeze because it's going to squeeze, through work requirements and other pieces. Potentially, a lot of folks are going to lose coverage. They'll still be there with their healthcare needs. And on the other side, it's squeezing the way states can raise their own revenues to pay for their share.
It's interesting. Earlier, Lisa said that it's not exactly known whether the work requirements, what they'll actually say and who will be carved out in this, what kind of protections will exist. You're talking about bills being dropped on Mother's Day at 10:30 at night. There's a lot of misinformation. What are your thoughts on the misinformation, and is that by design as well?
Oh,
or not necessarily misinformation. Let me try to be fair to the president here in the White House. Let me say maybe a lack of information.
Well, there is some misinformation. I'm just going to come right out and call it.
Sure.
Having watched a lot of the debate myself, and I'll tell you the number one area there's a lot of misinformation about, and that is about immigrants. So you're probably not going to be surprised to hear that this is really a rhetorical target in the bill. And there's a lot of discussion about how covering, illegal aliens, their words, not mine, is driving at Medicaid costs. And that's just not true because undocumented people are not eligible for federally funded Medicaid, period, end of story. There's one exception to that, that we'll come back to. Some states, like Connecticut, covers a very small number of children, undocumented children, with their own state dollars. And so there's a thread here to impose a huge penalty on those states in Connecticut. If Connecticut does not drop coverage of those undocumented children, which it's paying for with its own money, the federal government has cut $3 billion. That's billion with the B. So there's a huge amount of scapegoating here and misinformation about immigrants. The second piece where I think there's a lot of misinformation is about this work requirements question. Now, I can completely understand and get behind the fact that government, wants to support work, right? That's a perfectly reasonable objective for government policymakers to have. But this policy is not going to do it. And we know that because it's already been implemented in a few places. In fact, it probably undermines people's ability to work because they're not able to address their healthcare needs. But what it does do is for states who create very complicated red tape systems, they're going to have to hire expensive IT consultants. And so people get wrapped up in red tape and lose their coverage, even though they're really likely still eligible.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time following you, Joan, because I thought the federal government is not supposed to interfere with or contravene state legislature and the work that they do. So I apologize for that. I don't expect that to happen in 2025. But clear though here, and not so facetious as I just was. The people who may lose their coverage are not just adults, right? Are we looking at some children losing medical coverage as well? And obviously in Connecticut, you mentioned this small amount of state money that's used to support people that are immigrants. Those children that are under 26, I believe the law is actually 15 here in Connecticut. Yeah. They just recently expanded. Those are children that could lose this as well, right?
I'd be very surprised if Connecticut does not drop those children. Estimates I have, there's about 15,000 children under 15 who are covered by the state of Connecticut. And they're basically going to
have to drop them at that point.
They're going to have to drop them. Yes.
Keep going. Sorry,
and then I should say, yeah, there are other risks here for children. And we hear a lot of rhetoric about how children are protected. That's not necessarily true. First of all, a lot of their parents are at risk of losing coverage, and that's a problem for children. Caregivers, we know that childcare workers, for example, a lot of them covered by Medicaid because their wages are low. So they're at risk that way. But more generally, with these huge cuts, and I talked about sort of squeezing the state on their share that they put in, down the road, especially the state's going to have to make cuts across the entire program. So it's just not correct to say that children are out of harm's way.
Want to dig deeper, Lisa, into President Trump's tax proposal. Hey, if approved by the Senate, will alterations to funding for Medicaid happen right away? Would that be right away?
No. Well, it depends what happens in the Senate. I mean, they're going to need to negotiate everything. They'll pass their own bill. It'll likely look different than the House's version.
Oh, Mike Johnson, duck and hide right now. I'm sure he doesn't want to hear that.
Well, I think he's prepared for the buzzsaw that'll go through in the Senate, and then they'll work through everything. But let's say everything just stays as it is right now and it passes through Congress and fully, and the president signs it. These are things that will not happen immediately, and that is also partially by design as well. So, some of these tax relief proposals, they will kick in immediately, either end of the year or early next year. And some of these cuts that we're talking about right now, these are things that won't happen until 2027, 2028. I mean, some of these things will not take place until the next presidential administration, regardless of which party is in power. And so these are things that won't, happen for some time. Again, as we get to looking towards the Senate, there are some conservatives who say we want to try to pay for this and we want these cuts to kind of get phased in a lot faster. So again, it's a lot in flux right now, but a lot of these work requirements would not go into place at least for the next couple of years. And again, by design.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is the Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. You've been listening to Joan Alker, research professor at the Georgetown McCourt School of Public Policy and executive director of the Center for Children and Families, and Lisa Hagen, federal policy reporter for Connecticut Public and Connecticut Mirror. After the break, we take a closer look at the real people behind almost 8 million Americans at risk of losing Medicaid. Questions about your coverage? Give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. We want to talk to you. Give us a call. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. President Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill is headed to the Senate for approval. One major change in this approval, the elimination of Medicaid coverage for almost 8 million Americans by 2034. That's according to an estimate by the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. So who are the people behind the numbers? That's what we're digging into now. You can join the conversation, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Medicaid covers nearly 40% of births in the United States, Joan. It's according to the American Hospital Association. Could these budget cuts threaten President Donald Trump's push for a baby boom? And in what ways might these two presidential priorities sort of be in conflict with one another?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Medicaid is incredibly important for maternal and child health. As you mentioned, in Connecticut, there are about 38% of births are covered by Medicaid. In some states, that's higher. And children also are about half of children in the country are covered by Medicaid. So this is a critical program. And I want to mention one piece of this that we've done a great deal of study about, which is rural communities. Obviously, Connecticut's not a hugely rural state, but states like Louisiana, Kentucky, Arkansas, that have big rural populations, they are really, these rural hospitals are in huge trouble, and they've already been closing around the country. Medicaid is vitally important for births. And in particular, labor and delivery units have been going away. The majority of rural hospitals now have no labor and delivery unit. So we just did a report and had a guest speaker from Louisiana, where the rural hospital there, 75% Medicaid finance for births. And this hospital system said, if we see big Medicaid cuts, we're going to have to close. So I think the threat for these rural communities, this is a problem everywhere to see cuts to Medicaid. But for these rural communities, many of whom voted for President Trump, their ability to grow and thrive is gravely threatened if there's nowhere safe to have a baby.
I might say something that might shock you here, Joan, but do you know that many people in Connecticut live more than 25 minutes away from a labor and delivery unit? And that's not good, right?
It is definitely not good. We've already heard horror stories, particularly in states in the South where they haven't done Medicaid expansion for adults. But, as somebody who's a mom, I feel this one.
Medicaid and medical coverage is one thing, Lisa, but here we go with SNAP, something we've both paid attention to for so many years, formerly known as food stamps, also under threat. Who is eligible for SNAP, and what do you get when you got it?
Yeah, this is a big one that I think we'll see a lot of changes if this bill fully passes out of Congress. Again, we're talking about a lot of work requirements that'll be implemented for Medicaid, and Medicaid is something that is the cost or shared between both federal and state. And it's not that the states never pay for anything for SNAP, but this is really going to change the way they do cost sharing, because as it's structured right now, SNAP or food stamps, the benefit side is fully covered by the federal government. It's been that way that entire time. It covers a lot of low-income families, a lot of children. And so now the way that this is currently structured, or at least proposed in this bill, states will have to pick up quite a bit of the tab. I mean, anywhere from 5 to 25%. And so, we're talking about both Medicaid and SNAP during this discussion and saying these are not technically direct cuts, but when you're shifting the burden, especially in SNAP to states, I don't see how states can really pick up that tab, and how eligibility changes. That's a cut. and how there's just going to, again, potentially be direct cuts because the states can't pick up that whole burden. And so this is a really big restructuring of SNAP, and I think can have a really downward impact on a lot of families that rely on it currently. Anywhere from, I'm trying to think of the number, it's about 400,000 people in Connecticut on SNAP benefits.
We talk a lot about work requirements for Medicaid earlier. It comes up even more in this conversation generally about SNAP. How might that change who is eligible, and what are we talking about here being on the table?
Yeah. Yeah. So for work requirements, it's always been structured as able-bodied adults with no dependents. And so in the proposal for SNAP, it would really put a bigger burden and make people who are older adults basically have to start working. Again, those that do not have dependents, those who are able-bodied. And so basically raising the age from 54 to 64, basically right before retirement. So a whole new group of people who I don't know, or have not been in, who've not been working for a while, or maybe it's harder for them to find a job, would maybe have to find a career change. I mean, again, this is really focusing on a 54 to 64 age bracket that'll really change it. But then also this proposal has changed the age of a dependent. And so it's usually been under 18, and now an able-bodied adult without a dependent is someone considered someone with basically the dependent would be 7 years or younger. And so that would really quite change things drastically.
As Lisa Hagan has reported, at least 1 in 9 Connecticut residents are using SNAP benefits. That's a market for Caitlin Kimball, co-owner of Sunset Farm in Naugatuck, Connecticut. Here's what Caitlin told us about how a decrease in SNAP benefits means a 5 to 10% decrease in her annual sales.
That's a big part of our revenue that we rely on. It's a pretty steady part. And we also, we're really passionate about food access. And so a reduction in SNAP benefits is also going to limit who can purchase our food, who can, consume our food. And so, that would be devastating to farmers. I also I know a lot of farmers that are on SNAP benefits themselves. So farming is not a very lucrative profession. It's very noble. We enjoy doing it for our communities, but there are years where you do not make a lot of money. So I'm thinking of a lot of farmers that I know, who would lose benefits themselves.
Shout out to Chloe Wynn for getting that interview with Caitlin. And it's important to see Caitlin there on the farm, not for nothing. You see rain in the background. These weather events are not always friendly to farmers, so they're dealing with that. We've seen a lot of legislation locally trying to protect farmers from natural disasters. But now you have this happening, Lisa. So I'm wondering what your reactions are to what you just heard from Caitlin.
Yeah, SNAP and again, a lot of these other programs, these nutrition programs they're mutually beneficial. Obviously, it is for the recipient. They are able to get money to help them provide food for themselves and their families, be able to access different kinds of food. And so, but at the same time, it is a mutually beneficial thing for the farmers who grow this food and provide this food. And then especially for independent grocers, we look at places, these big supermarket retail places, they're not going to see hits as much. But I'm trying to remember the percentage, but for some independent grocers, it makes up close to half of the revenue, going through SNAP. And so it really is a driver of the economy. And again, obviously, this would take the biggest toll on the people who actually receive food stamps, SNAP benefits.
Joan, you mentioned this earlier in the show, so let's get into the dual eligibles, because my understanding is that those folks would lose Medicaid. Who is eligible for Medicare and Medicaid, and why do we have dual coverage in the first place?
Yeah. So when, folks turn 65, as everybody knows, they're eligible for Medicare. And of course, we have people with serious disabilities who are also covered by Medicare. And Medicaid really works to make Medicare work, quite honestly. That's a role that Medicaid plays in a lot of our healthcare system, because Medicare does not cover long-term care. And that's, of course, a huge growing need that we have in our society. And that's another reason why it's so troubling to implement these cuts to Medicaid at a time when our population is aging and is going to need more long-term care. So Medicaid is also paying some of the cost sharing for low-income seniors in Medicare. So ironically, for an administration that's supposedly been focused on government efficiency, this bill repeals some binary regulations that were designed to make the process less difficult for seniors and people with disabilities and others to apply for and get their Medicaid coverage. So that kind of red tape leads to coverage loss, and that's what the Congressional Budget Office estimated, with 1.3 million seniors losing their Medicaid.
I wanted to go back to something. I looked this up, Lisa, just to help you out here. SNAP supporting nearly 199,000 jobs within the independent grocery industry and 45,000 jobs in related industries such as agriculture, manufacturing, transportation, and local services. So SNAP, just on the economic impact, they're very important, and that's from the Center for American Progress. That shows how important SNAP dollars are. And thank you, Joan, for your perspective there on what's happening in terms of dual eligibles. Lisa, can you tell me what you're going to be following next year?
I'm going to be waiting for this bill to make its way to the Senate. They're currently on recess because of Memorial Day, and they will be back next week. And it's going to be pretty much a mad dash from now until this deadline they've set for themselves, July 4th. It's not a hard and fast deadline. It's just when they kind of want to wrap this thing up. And so we will be watching all these negotiations and see really, what changes and what, Senate Republicans feel like they can handle, and also same for the House Republicans. So it'll be a interesting thing to watch over the next month.
It's a big, beautiful bill. And we're talking about an Independence Day celebration for the big, beautiful bill. Is there going to be a military parade in honor of this? And how realistic is it actually that this could get done in the next month, I guess, if there are changes, particularly in the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, it came down to the wire of whether the House was going to pass it before Memorial Day. That was the other deadline they gave themselves. They got it done. It was a nail biter. I imagine it'll be the same way for this. But, the longer you drag this out, the more you're going to butt up towards needing to fund the federal government and avoid a government shutdown. So the clock is ticking for them on this.
I guess at least working in their favor is that folks are actually working this year, and it's not an election year. It's not a federal election year, so that might help them out as well. Joan, hey, what are you looking at? What will you be watching for in the coming months, and what should listeners know about why this all matters?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other context to think about is, normally, and we don't know where the economy's going. Obviously, the folks that forecast recessions have said that, there's a growing likelihood that we may move into a recession. And typically, Congress actually increases Medicaid funding during a recession. So that's, I think, another really important thing to keep in mind is that if these huge cuts are made and our economy worsens, Medicaid's a critical safety net for folks who lose their jobs. So that's something I worry about a lot. And, I think the bill's probably going to run through July in terms of when Congress gets this done. But it's really important you're having the show, because now is the time, right, for listeners to really pay attention. This thing is moving along quickly. It's moving often in the middle of the night, so it's hard to keep track of, but there's lots of good information out there. We have a lot of information on our website about the Medicaid impacts, so do stay tuned.
Thank you so much, Joan. I appreciate that. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. You've been listening to Lisa Hagen, a good friend of mine, federal policy reporter for Connecticut Public and the Connecticut Mirror. Lisa, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Always great to join you.
Also listening to Joan Alker, research professor at at Georgetown University, the Hoyas, McCourt School of Public Policy, and executive director for the Center for Children and Families. Joan, great to have you on The Wheelhouse.
Thanks so much for having me.
After the break, I told you there would be a surprise if you're following on social media. We head to the basketball court with a look at the future of the state's WNBA team. You might be thinking, what does basketball have to do with politics? Oh, I'm going to tell you about it, and I'm not going to tell you about it alone. I'm going to have a friend with me. Stay tuned after the break to find out who that is. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We spent most of the show talking about Medicaid, but we're going to finish it up with a pivot in the post. If you don't think Connecticut's professional sports teams or the lack of pro sports teams is a political issue, you'll want to stay in the game for a second with me here. To the hardwood, where local residents receiving jarring news earlier this month, the Connecticut Sun, one of the WNBA's most popular franchises since its debut in 2003, Frankie Graziano's favorite basketball team, may be sold off by the Mohegan Tribe and relocated. I got somebody next to me.
Yeah.
I got somebody next to me.
Who's next to you, Frankie? Who's
To
this?
learn more about how Connecticut could lose its only major professional sports team and how the politicals are reacting to it is a friend of mine from Connecticut Public, the host of All Things Considered here, John Henry Smith. Good morning, John Henry.
A friend indeed, man. Good to see you, brother.
Good to see you.
You got me up early this morning.
I got you up early this morning, and you got to work later. I know. What a pain in the butt this is,
hey,
but
man,
I'm so happy to
the
talk
checks
to you.
don't bounce. It's not a pain in the butt at all. I love it here.
That's right. We got to keep John Henry and I employed. We used to do something like this every Friday, right?
And it was so much fun. I do miss it. I do miss it.
Frankie and Johnny
Frankie
was
and Johnny.
a feature on ATC for years. Today, we're reviving it on the Wheelhouse, and we invite you to join us live. Tell us where you stand on the prospect of losing the state's WNBA team. We got time to take your calls. You can talk to Frankie and Johnny live on the air. How about that? 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. John Henry, let's get to business here. People may not know this, but the Sun are essentially a government-run franchise.
Yeah, that's right, Frankie. I mean, the Mohegan Tribe, they bought the Connecticut Sun back in, I think, about 2003. They were the former Orlando Miracle, and they came here for an investment of about $10 million. You can certainly see the wisdom as to why the Mohegan Tribe wanted to do it. It's the same reason Las Vegas said, Frank Sinatra, come and play in Las Vegas. We want people to come through those front doors, those turnstiles, buy a hamburger on the way to or from your show, maybe play the slot machine on the way to or from. It's certainly a draw to have people come into the establishment. And by the way, the Connecticut Sun in 2007, the first WNBA team to turn a profit. So it's been a sound investment, and in the next year, it's going to be even sounder, as we'll talk about.
Such a successful franchise. I want to underscore that because it's not like they're doing bad here.
Right.
But I guess all things come to an end. Frank Sinatra didn't play in Vegas forever. He was driven out. And the Sun, not necessarily.
I didn't know Frank Sinatra was driven out of Las Vegas.
I wouldn't say it necessarily that way, but Frank Sinatra had some run-ins. If you watch a CNN documentary, Frank Sinatra, I think maybe overstayed his welcome. Maybe that is. He always came back, but you get the idea.
About old Blue Eyes.
John Henry Smith, if you're looking at the situation with the Sun here, it's not necessarily that they'll be driven out. It's just that the market may dictate that they have to go here and spread their wings.
Yeah, I mean, you got some factors at play here with why this sale is potentially happening. I mean, number one, again, the Mohegan Tribe paid $10 million for it, and now apparently the valuation of these teams, if you believe the Sportico article that came out and broke this news in the last month, conservatively the Sun are now valued at $80 million, which is, believe it or not, ninth in the WNBA. So the valuations of these teams have shot up. So the money they can make on this sale is pretty high, and the cost of doing business is gone up substantially. Players' salaries are going up, and you've got the Sun don't have a dedicated practice facility.
I was going to say, yeah. So you think about it, like the Indiana Fever, not the biggest market in the world, but they're in an NBA arena. They have the training facility. The Connecticut Sun practice in the government center nearby.
Exactly. I mean, you take a look. Phoenix has about $100 million practice facility. Chicago's got a $38 million one. I think Seattle has a $64 million one. That's going to be the part of the cost of doing business. You got free agents looking to, what team should I go to? Oh, look, Seattle showed me, took me on a tour of this gleaming practice facility. Hey, Connecticut Sun, what do you got? We got the government building over here. It's not going to fly, and it's going to be tough to. That's increasingly becoming the cost of competing.
It's so hard to find a place to live, like a decent place to live in the Norwich area for a professional athlete too,
Sure.
because they're living in these apartments. Hey, league's popularity has exploded, and I'm not trying to say bad things about
100%.
Norwich. I love you, Norwich. I love southeastern Connecticut. Of course, we do a lot of work with the tribal nations as well, but it's just not the infrastructure is not there. I know that on the reservation it might be a little bit different, but nonetheless, the league's popularity exploding, particularly since Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese arrived last year.
Right.
This is a state that love women's basketball here. The Sun play in Connecticut, where the UConn women have won an all-time best 12 national titles. I'm going to keep going here, John Henry. Sun are good, too. They reached at least the WNBA semis the past 5 seasons.
They've done well.
The league's entrusted Mohegan with 4 All-Star games in the 2 decades they've been here. You said they're the first team to turn a profit. So what gives, John Henry? There's all these good things happening.
There are 20,000 people that live in Uncasville, 20,000 thereabout, give or take. And you take a look at the DMA, the designated market area, a term that we use in broadcasting, TV, and all that. The designated market area for that part of Connecticut is 270,000. Let's compare that small market team to the small market team in the NFL, the Green Bay Packers. 100,000 people live in that area. The DMA, including Milwaukee and whatnot, is 1.2 million. Lots more eyeballs, lots more people who potentially could go buy tickets. And the NFL has complete revenue sharing. So a team like Green Bay, they're going to get that huge nice chunk of that huge TV contract. The WNBA only shares about 35% of their TV contract. It's a much smaller TV contract, and that 35% goes directly to the players, which I'm not mad at, but it doesn't go to the teams. So it's much harder to make it work, make the numbers, what do the kids say now? Make the math. It is much harder to make the math in a market the size of Uncasville and in Connecticut in general.
They'll try to cook it too, and put even Norwich, which is technically its own market. They'll try to loop that in with the New Haven Hartford market to make it a little bigger.
Still not enough.
It's still not enough, and there's the potential to be in Boston or even New York if they wanted to add a second franchise in New York. But I know that's not necessarily on the table. But there's bigger markets outside.
There's
of
a feeding frenzy going on right now. I mean, you've got ownership groups put together in Detroit, in Austin, in Portland, in Charlotte, in Philadelphia, in Boston. You know, when you remember the Sun played in the TD Ameritrade, I think that's what it's called, center in Boston, and they sold that out. It was a sellout.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so you know, that can't be lost on the people who run the WNBA. Hey, look at all these people we could attract.
That makes me feel it's a sore subject for me because it reminds me of how Bill Simmons used to write when he worked for ESPN about Buffalo and how they were sleeping with Toronto essentially when Buffalo was looking for a new stadium.
So
they're getting a new.
Yikes.
Well, so my question is, so we were talking about them potentially moving to Toronto, and we know that the Pegula family bought the Bills and things are okay. Right. It's not necessarily going to happen that way in Connecticut. Should I feel dirty when there's these basketball games that the Sun are playing in Boston if I'm a diehard Connecticut Sun fan and I want them to stay here?
I think. Should you feel? Well, I can't help how you feel. Nobody can help you if you want to feel dirty. Okay, but the handwriting on the wall is the handwriting on the wall.
Yeah, that's right.
And the math is the math.
One of the things you get asked a lot about when you run the state of Connecticut, John Henry and I don't run the state of Connecticut.
We do not.
It's the viability of pro sports here, and particularly in a place where people remember the Whale. The hockey franchise that left in 1997. Surely, Governor Ned Lamont, John Henry, has said something about this.
Yeah, Governor Lamont made a statement after the Sportico article broke, saying that we're going to do everything. I'm not quoting him. I am just giving you the gist of what he said, and the gist was, "Hey, we are going to talk to the Connecticut Sun, and we're going to try to convince them to stay." But I think if you ever heard of sodium pentothal? If you watch those old spy movies, it's truth serum. I think if you gave Governor Lamont a sodium pentothal smoothie, I think he would be the first one to admit that it's probably not going to happen. Same thing with the Sun. The Sun have made comments that, well, we're in the evaluation stage and we haven't made a decision yet. sodium pentothal smoothie ingested, they would probably tell you that this is all but a done deal. The writer from the I had a writer on my show, Edie Williams. I can't remember his first name, but he was on the show saying he doesn't expect the team will move this season. They've sold out this season. I mean, they're doing well at the box office, but
again, that's another positive indicator. Yeah.
Exactly, but he expects the sale to happen at some point before the end of this current season.
And that's the bittersweet thing about all this. Obviously, you want the WNBA to excel. One of our colleagues on the Wheelhouse team, I think it was Robin Doyen-Aiken, shared that WNBA is going to now be tracking Nielsen ratings.
Sure.
So it's exploding, and that means it has to get out of Connecticut, unfortunately. But if you're a diehard fan and you've been through so many of the moments, I've been to so many of their playoff series, you just want to see them succeed here. But obviously, it's one of those things where we're going to have to watch them maybe fly away. Can't believe we're talking about this, John Henry. Remember the whale, maybe soon it's Remember the Sun. Go ahead.
Well, and the question comes as to, will a pro sports team ever be viable here in a major pro sports team? Obviously, the Hartford Yard Goats and the Wolf Pack. I mean, they've done their business here for many years and whatnot. But as far as a top level league putting a team here, I think it's going to have to, the numbers the numbers of potential eyeballs and spenders basically don't compare to some of the larger markets out there in the United States. And what's going to happen here is you're going to have the only way it can work is you're going to have a revenue sharing agreement that helps mitigate some of that here in this town, and you're going to have if another pro sports team gets here, we are going to have to support them with the fire and the intensity of 1,000 suns.
I was about to say that. So you get less than a minute to do this because we got to go. Tell me something that you're saying revenue sharing has to work for pro sports to work in Connecticut. I'll counter to say that it has to be a team that plays in Bridgeport, Connecticut, with a whole bunch of private money that supports it, and it's very close to 95, and it's a little closer to New York. What would you say in about 30 seconds in terms of pro sports viability?
Sure thing. I think there's people in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and you need lots of people, and plus it's on closer to the western part of the state. Maybe you could attract some of the people from eastern New York and whatnot. That's not a completely unreasonable thing to say. I just think at the end of the day, it's going to be very tough, but never say never. Never say never. I mean, the one thing that team is going to have to contend with, whatever pro sports team comes here in the future, is that they're going to have to understand that it's going to be hard times at the outset. It takes a while to build a legacy. Look at the WNBA. People were talking trash about that league. And now look at them now. So they've got to hold out through the bad times.
And shout out to women's sports, too. That's why we talk about this at the end of the day. And it is viable right now. Unfortunately, pro sports in Connecticut, not necessarily viable, but that could change down the line. Wanted to also say on the way out here, something else politicians are considering in Connecticut is making it legal to bet on local college teams. We didn't get time to talk about that today, but that's something you'll want to watch, folks. And obviously the passage of the new 2-year budget. Folks might be talking about that with John Henry Smith on his show on All Things Considered. You can listen to it at 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock every evening, including this evening on Connecticut Public. Visit ctpublic.org for listings in your area. John Henry, we did Frankie and Johnny today. Thank you for coming on the show.
My man, as Denzel Washington loves to say.
Oh, my God. The pleasure's been all mine. Thank you so much for coming on the show. That's it for today's show. Produced by Chloe Wynn, edited by Robin Doyen-Aiken. Technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Special shout out to our visuals team and Megan Fitzgerald. Download the Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.